Hello all, we have the Little Western here back again with a new episode show to talk with a new show to talk about. So, what is this show exactly? Well, get ready to find out. When we pump our pistons, put our coal into our fireboxes, get some steam, and take a trip back in time. So, what we're going to do exactly is that we are going to cover every single character of the model era. Yes, I said it. We are including every single character from the model era. We are going to be doing only the classic seasons of Thomas. No hit era or CGI stuff or railway series will be included. Cry about it. But we will cover every single classic series character, from standard gauge to narrow gauge. We will cover every character from their first season to their final season of the classic era. And today, we'll be covering our number 2 character for the first episode. And that character is, you all know who it is, Edward. Yes, we are going to be stoking up our number 2 blue engine, and we'll let him take a trip back in time, and we'll review his history throughout the classic series. Let's take a trip to 1984. Edward's journey throughout Season 1 is, well, okay, to be precise. Honestly, I don't think he really got that much focus in Season 1, other than he got his big episode in the second episode of the entire show. Well, how, exactly? Well, for starters, Gordon kept boasting to him and he wouldn't stop. But then Gordon gets stuck on his hill and Edward pushes him. What a Chad. Then, once Edward heard about Henry getting stuck in the tunnel and Gordon bursting a safety valve or something, or whatever, he comes over to help with the express. He tries to push, but obviously he couldn't. So then, Henry is let out of the tunnel because he decided to help. And so very reluctantly, they arrive at the station just in time. Gotta say, I love this one. And then one night, Edward decides to let Thomas take his trucks, while Edward takes the yards for the day. Huh. What a kind engine. And then one day, Edward helps out with James with the express, in which it goes, obviously, very well. But at the beginning, James, just whooshes Sir Tophnath's hat or something. Like, what? I don't get it. And then they just stop at Marin, and then they go back to the sheds, and then whatever. I don't know. And so then, Edward decides to help out on the main line with Thomas and Percy. Well, Thomas and Edward worked on the main line, while Percy ran his branch line. Huh, what a kind episode. And then Gordon's fire would not light. In the episode, Gordon takes a dip, so Edward decided to push Gordon to the turntable so he could be faced the right way. Well, I don't know why I'm making so much positive remarks on Season 1. I used to think this season was kind of boring, but now that I look at it, it's not so boring after all. Well, at least for most episodes. And so, in the episode Thomas's Christmas Party, Edward is the one to join in the Christmas carols, as a thank you to Miss Kindly for helping Thomas. And I gotta say, this is a great ending to Season 1. Well, what happens if we go further in time? Well, why don't we go check and see what he does in Season 2. And to the fact, there is some changes with Edward in Season 2. Not very minor, but with some amount of episodes he gets in Season 2. But now we can get to that. And so, what does he do in Season 2? Edward in Series 2, well, he gets more focus, as he is the lead of several different episodes. Well, for one, Edward gets his spotlight episode with, to no one's surprise, Birdie. Yes, we get introduced to the Edward and Birdie dynamic in this episode, in which Birdie tries to catch up to Edward, but Edward doesn't notice, and just carries on. But he notices in the end. And then one day, he comes across an old traction engine named Trevor, in which he is already saved. In which we get another James and Edward dynamic episode, in which it is called Old Iron, as you already know. In this episode, James becomes a runaway, and Edward tries to save him. And say it with me, folks, what a Chad. And in the next episode, we get another Edward and Trevor episode, this time with Thomas in it. In this episode, Edward takes Trevor to Ellsbridge Yards, where Thomas is there to collect him. I mean, Thomas and Trevor didn't have a good relationship with each other, I don't know, but at least they had a good episode together, in which Trevor decides to help rebuild the old harbor. Wow, I'm actually getting positive remarks over Season 2, saying I also didn't really like it, but now that I look at it, I think it's quite good now. Not the best season, but definitely a good one. And then, in the next episode, which is called A Close Shave, which is obviously a Duck story, Duck helps Edward to push his train up the hill. Wow, I think I really like this episode because, well, it has a great crash and all. And then, in another Edward and Gordon episode, well, Edward takes the main line, while Gordon thinks the light is green, well, I don't know, thinks that the signal, that I don't know. Yeah, I've really never seen Wrong Road before, well, I've only seen it a few times, but I really forget what happens in there, but yeah, I've heard rumor that Edward has gone on the main line and Gordon down the branch line. Wow. First time Gordon's gone on a branch line, and Edward on the main line. Well, Edward wasn't on the main line the first time. He has been on it several times in this season. But, yeah. Edward did have a pretty good year. And in the next episode, Edward's Exploit, Edward takes a bunch of passengers to Bill and Ben to let them take a tour of the China clay pits. And then Edward takes them back down to Knapford. But on one rainy day, he kept going and going, but he couldn't, and then he broke his crank pin. But he managed to get to the station anyway, where Henry was there to take them home. In which we get another Christmas episode at the same exact spot as the last season, in which Edward is invited to this one. So that was Edward in Season 2, or Series 2 if you're in the UK. So yeah, Edward pretty much did a lot. And we had a 2-year gap. But what happens if we do a 5-year gap? Let's see what he does next. So let's travel a bit forward in time and see what Edward does next. Edward's journey throughout Series 3 is interesting, to say the least. I think he just gets the least amount of lead roles, because he didn't do that much this year, other than he tells Duck his advice, and he helps out a poor sad Trevor with the garden party. Huh, pretty sad Trevor. But Edward doesn't really do that much all this year. He just helps engines. Well, the category of Edward for Season 3 is that he helps out another character. Like, he gives advice to Duck about Gordon and about his boasting, and he helps Trevor with the garden party. Huh. Edward has done, like, 2 helpful things this series, so he doesn't do that much. Oh, and I forgot to mention that Edward also warns Percy that there is a flash bloodstorm on the way. Huh, that's pretty nice. But overall, Edward doesn't really do that much this year. He warns Percy about the flash bloodstorm, he helps Duck with some advice, and he helps Trevor with the garden party. That's all he does in this season. 3 things in a full season. Let's travel into Season 4. Edward in Season 4, he didn't really do all that much, other than he talked to Skarloey in this one scene. But that's all. That's literally it, I think. But yeah, Edward doesn't really do that much in Season 4, nor Season 5, but I'll get to that. And then, the next thing he does is shout to everyone that the Queen is here. Like, that's just not all that much. First off, he talks to Skarloey, and then he just tells everyone the Queen is coming. Okay, that's not too bad, but that's not that much. Like, why is Edward the side protagonist now? Like, why? Why did they reduce this? You know, this is actually one I really hate. I really don't like that they reduce the characters, but I think that's inevitable that as the cast is growing. Because by the next season, a lot of characters are just forgotten. Even some narrow gauge characters like Sir Handel, Duke. But that's literally it. That's all Edward does. But it just gets worse in Season 5. But Edward does change up some things a bit. So, I guess we can start traveling now to Season 5. So, let's travel 4 or 3 more years in time and see what Edward does the next season. He got his lines in the episodes James and the Trouble with Trees, Haunted Henry, Happy Ever After, and Rusty and the Boulder. So, let's go over each and every one of them before we move on to the next season. In James and the Trouble with Trees, he got his first line at the end of the episode, saying,
"The Fat Controller thinks you're both brave engines. Thomas, you're going to have a new coat of paint, and James, the Fat Controller says that tomorrow you'll pull the Special Express."
I mean, like, that's all he said. But there's more to it than meets the eye. In the next episode he is in, Haunted Henry, he also says this.
Whenever that owl hoots, a mist rolls in, murmured Edward. There's a legend that when the mist's about, there's a ghost about too. Take care on the old line, Henry.
Like, yeah, I know that's a little line there, but, I mean, it's alright, I guess. But, it's already in a perfect episode, so why not? Just let it slide. And then, in this episode, Happy Ever After, which is obviously another episode that Edward's in, he says this.
Oh, yes, indeed. Something old, something new, probably staring you in your smoke box. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to fetch my special train. I'm taking guests to the wedding.
But this is another Percy episode, he didn't really get that much focus. And then the final episode he's in for Season 5 is Rusty and the Boulder, in which he brings Thumper, the new driller, to the yards. And he also says this.
It's called Thumper. Apparently it helps collect the rock faster.
I mean, yeah, it's not that much, but okay. But yeah, that's all Edward does in Season 5. I have forgotten if there are other episodes he spoke in, but if there is, let me know in the comments. But honestly, that's all he does in Season 5, just speak here on out. Like, yeah, I know it's Season 5, and they didn't really know what to do with Edward, I don't know. But I'm not just really sure what happened to that. But I think it's just coming to the assumption that they didn't know what to do with Edward. So, let's move on to the next season, and see what Edward does there, shall we? Edward didn't really do all that much in Season 6, but there is one very much exception. Surprisingly, he actually gets an episode, the episode being called Edward the Very Useful Engine. In this episode, the bigger engines think that Edward is old and unreliable. Wow, very, very harsh. Until one day where Duck and Gordon get stuck on a hill. And then Gordon tries to push but couldn't. So then Edward comes to help. And very surprisingly, Gordon gets what he deserves in the end. And it's surprising that Edward could push 2 engines up a big freaking hill and all the way to Knapford Station. Wow. Say it with me, folks. What a Chad. He has helped Gordon before. And this is obviously, I think, a callback to Season 1, where Gordon needed help on the hill. But this time, with Duck in it. Huh. Very clever. The show did something with Duck after all these years of absence and no episodes with him. But overall, this is just another Gordon and Edward episode that I kind of think is alright for an Edward episode. Some people really hate it, and Unlucky Tuck says this is his worst Season 6 episode, but I disagree. I think this one's alright. But honestly, I can say that this episode's not really great. It's still pretty much not bad. I do have to agree on this confusion about Edward not leaving or something at the end, I don't know. I have to agree with Unlucky Tug there, but I completely disagree on his opinion. I think this is an okay episode. But yeah, could use some improvements, but overall, not too bad. And we do see Stepney again. Yay! Stepney's back. And I wish we could have seen more of him. So, what will they do with Edward in the next season? Well, very surprisingly, he gets another episode to himself, this time with another character. Let's just go and see who this character really is. I wonder who will be the character. Alright, Edward in Season 7 for the final classic series. And get ready to know who that character he rivals with. It's not Gordon, obviously not. It's not Henry. It's not James. It has to be Birdie. Oh yes. We finally get another Edward and Birdie episode. Ah yes. We finally get another Edward and Birdie episode since, like, what, Season 2? Like, wow, it's been such a while. Since when's the last time Edward has a story with Birdie? Like, wow, Season 2. It's been, like, I don't know. Let me just count it. So 96, 86, 96, 10, 20... So it's been 17 years since we've had another Edward and Birdie episode. I wish this could have been done in Season 6, or Season 3, but the brass band wasn't introduced then. And it's cool that they like to introduce the brass band until Season 7, and they would reappear in the show moving forward. But this is their debut episode. And it's nice that we get to have another Edward and Birdie episode. I wish we could have had Edward could have had other dynamic episodes, like with him and Gordon and Thomas, I mean, Edward had a little bit of dynamic with Thomas. A little bit. But he mostly got the episode with Birdie. It's very, very, very jarring. And I love it, surprisingly. And I think that's pretty much it for Edward. We have now covered the entire classic history of Edward. But let's just talk about the episode before we get started. He rivals with Birdie in his episode, Edward's Brass Band. In this episode, Edward is doing his usual job with Stepney, until he has to head to Brenham Docks to collect the brass band. But as he arrives at the docks, he gets into an accident with a ship boiler, in which Cranky comments, he says that he is useless, and that little engines are in the way or something. But we'll talk about that in Cranky's history. But yeah, this is Edward's best episode this year. Honestly, the best Edward episode in the entire classic series, in my opinion, just because of its characters. It let out the characters totally right, but it does have some faulty problems. That random tune thing, but yeah, we don't care about that. In which Birdie has to get the brass band to the concert, but can't because last night had flooded the road. Because, yeah, last night's storm flooded the road, in which that's very surprising. And then Birdie just stupidly takes a muddy shortcut, because, well, that's the only thing he could do. But then Edward finally comes to take the brass band to the concert, in which this actually went very well. What an ending to the Edward stories of the classic series. Edward has a very intriguing journey. Honestly, the crash in this episode was alright, I guess. I mean, I like that Cranky reappeared in this episode. But nonetheless, this number 2 engine is absolutely one of the best characters of the Thomas franchise. Wait a minute, I think I have one more thing to say. Honestly, this journey has been intriguing. Edward is honestly one of my favorite characters of Thomas and Friends. And I'll just flat out say he's the best character in my opinion. Surprising, huh? I used to think that my favorite character was Thomas, but honestly it's now Edward. But overall, still pretty intriguing journey. As the first episode, in the first episode, I went through one of my favorite characters of the entire show. Honestly, Sir Topham Hatt's #2 engine of the Railway series, and is now a fully grown character, with many dynamics with Thomas, Bertie, and Gordon, and Henry. Honestly, this has been very intriguing, that I go over a journey through the classic history of characters. And honestly, I think Edward deserves the gold medal for best character of Thomas and Friends. Thomas is usually one of the best, but I think Edward should deserve the medal. And so, we've come to the end of the journey, and it's time for us to go home. Just like Edward. Oh wait, I think I'm sorry guys, I just have one more thing to say. Honestly, I kinda don't know, I just wanted to have a perfect ending for the first episode. Honestly, I can say I'd love to have perfect endings to the episodes of the classic history of Thomas, but yeah, I really like the episodes of Edward. Edward being old and worn out, in my opinion, feels so very intriguing. Very interesting for a character who is the #2 on Sir Topham Hatt's railway. But honestly, I'll flat out say that Edward is my best character. Well, I think I've already said that, but I just wanted to have a perfect ending to the character. And honestly, I'll just flat out say that we have now come to the end of the video. And I hope you all drop your opinions on Edward in the comments. I'd love to hear your opinions. Say it with me, folks. It's good to be back from the wise old #2 engine.